Thank you so much, Saloni, for sharing Zeno's point of view on generative AI. And I believe all of us can agree on the theme of it, like how it is enabling enterprises to be autonomous. Uh, Before I start, I would like to invite all the speakers to turn on their cameras. Thanks. So my name is Atul Shrivastava, and I'm associated with Zenov in the capacity of engagement manager. I work very closely with technology and platform companies and will be the chair for today's session. Before I start the panel discussion with our speakers, I would like to invite all the speakers to do a quick round of introductions for our listeners and attendees. Can we start with you, Utkarsh?
Thank you, Atul. Hi, Utkarsh. I lead strategy for our field organization, which looks at the entire customer success, sales, and services portfolio within SAP. Very excited to be here. We've started to do a lot more in this space, and I wanted to just share some of the insights which we've actually gotten already working with generative AI.
Perfect. Can we go to Matt now?
Hello, everyone. Matt Jennings, the Vice President of Global Customer Success with Microsoft, and ultimately the responsibility of the Customer Success Account Manager in that role around the world and how we align and deliver for our customers based on our Microsoft solutions.
Thank you, Matt. Over to you, Betsy.
Hi, I'm Betsy Graytalk. I'm Vice President and Associate General Counsel for IBM Software, supporting both development and product releases related to data and AI, also automation and other software offerings. And I work very closely with our AI Ethics Board, which has been designed to embed ethics by design in our products and offerings.
Thank you for the introduction. And I'm very excited to learn more about Gen AI out of the discussion. And I hope the feeling is same for the attendees as well. So generative AI and ChatGPT, to be precise, have become the talk of the town, as Saloni also mentioned, for businesses, and a lot of companies are now utilizing or at least exploring its use in functions such as sales and marketing or other functions, right? So Utkarsh, if I may start with you, how do you see this trend shaping future business environments?
Yeah, no, thanks, Atul. I think the concept of using AI has been there for some time. I think what generative AI has done is it's sort of added an acceleration and a democratization of mostly for the business, users and the business folks as well. I mean, let's take the concept of, what we've had, all kinds of automation in the past, but they've primarily focused, on low value add activities. I think generative AI has sort of question the basis of what could be automated, what could be actually taken on by the machine. And you're really looking at creative, high value adding activities which were seen in the past being taken over by AI, which again, I think really adds a new paradigm to what enterprises could potentially scale to do. The phenomenal aspect of this is as we look at especially the tech sector and also others, we're looking at, the concept of profitable growth, trying to grow non-linearly. And, this is actually a very timely sort of augmentation of what has come in with AI, because this allows, companies to be able to really grow in a non-linear fashion in activities and tasks and, programs which probably were not even imagined could be done by machines in the past, So I think from a concept of autonomous enterprise, I think we were already on the journey. If anything, this has just accelerated it, probably put more power in the business users. I mean, we talk about the concept of low code, no code. I think obviously this takes it to a brand new level when you look at the concept of generative AI. I mean, we all have seen that concept of where someone drew a website on a piece of a paper, and that was translated into a website automatically by generative AI. So I think we really have started to scratch the surface when it comes to use cases. I think, we have sort of taken much more of an open approach even within our own organization, because we believe such kind of innovation, while there needs to be central coordination, it's probably better done bottom up and really embracing the democratization, as I say, of innovation here. Yeah.
Yeah, Utkarsh, I think definitely it is like a kind of a start of democratization also, as our theme is autonomous, and you also agree that this is a kind of a start of that autonomous mind frame, and we are in that journey. So Betsy, if I ask you about this, and as Gen AI can help you automate a lot of business functions and increase productivity, let's say by shortening a lot of processes like content management, can we say it is the start emergence of at least? What are your thoughts on that?
Did anybody else have trouble?
Yeah, I didn't hear that as well, Betsy. I thought it was me. Maybe Atul, can you repeat the last? Yeah.
Sure, perfect. No problem. So, Betsy, I was asking because the theme of our today's roundtable is autonomous enterprises, and Utkarsh also touched upon that. What are your views on that? Because if what we understand, Gen AI can help to automate a lot of business functions and increase productivity, right? So can we say it is in the right direction, and is it truly emergence of autonomous enterprises?
I would not say it's truly autonomous enterprises. I mean, to me, then it brings up images of the Wizard of Oz and the man behind the curtain. And you really can't have just one man behind the curtain running an entire operation with a bunch of machines. So I do agree that it's similar to other inflection points that we've seen throughout history in which machines have come along and produced increased productivity, enabled us to do more. And so I think you will see it filling skills gaps that we currently have. And I do think it will be a catalyst to having new skills in the workplace, people going through a lot of job retraining, but also freeing them up to be more creative, more productive, apply their skills at a higher level. And so I don't think we're ever going to be truly an autonomous enterprise, but I do think we will be a much more effective and productive enterprise.
Sure. So maybe productivity and efficiency enhancement could be the top things that we can definitely leverage. Matt, if I come to you, sorry. Yeah, Betsy.
No, I was just going to add an innovation too, because once you've freed those people up to be, to worry less about process and mundane tasks, then you're leading to innovation, I think.
Right. And I think it will also add or integrate new use cases as well, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So, Matt, if I come to you, so according to you, where will be the integration of these Gen AI tools will be the highest? It would be like cross industry functions or industry specific use case. Where do you see the highest penetration?
Well, it's a really good question. I think a lot of it is yet to be seen, but I think there's going to be, a lot of integration across various industries. And I think areas where it's most important is where you have these large, complex data sets, or other areas where you have the need to be creative. And as Betsy had mentioned, we're focusing on then those customer tasks, but can the AI generate some creativity starting point for us to start in? I also think as we talk about large, complex data sets, you think about healthcare, you think about finance, manufacturing. Manufacturing produces a lot of data. You think about the various systems that go into manufacturing, like supply chain. How can we start to look at all that data differently? Also, if you look at creative industries, you think about advertising, you think about the ability to create content. Some of those things, I think it's going to have a dramatic impact on, at least as a starting point. Can it get you 80% of the way there and then really allow more time to focus on the creative part of it? I think likely that's where we're going to see some of that. You're already seeing some of this in virtual assistants, chatbots, things like that. There's also like personalized responses now that can get more personalized because they have more data about the individual, about the consumer to respond back to. So think about that in retail. It's getting hyper-focused on personalization for the end customer. I also think that if you look at any technology that comes out, it's about how do you apply it for efficiency, productivity, innovation, some of the things that Betsy had talked about as well. And it's really going to be about differentiation in segments from my perspective.
Got it. And if I ask you, Utkarsh, the same thing, where do you think the integration is happening more? It is again based on industry specific use cases or different functions like I think Matt mentioned about content management or supply chain and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I do see the use cases go across the board in terms of function. I mean, let's take one of the examples which has not been shared, right? I mean, the most common one, which probably everyone on the call has gone through, I mean, HR, right? You look at the concept of human resources and how we manage people, right from how you post the job description to, how do you actually personalize the questions you may ask based on the job description and the profile of the candidate, to even getting to the other later stages of, looking at what are the right kind of learning content which we have and what could be right for the particular candidate once they're on board, once they're actually ongoing, and then also providing feedback, right? I mean, and how do you actually provide feedback? Across that entire journey of an employee or a person in any enterprise, you could see multiple parts of these being augmented by the use of generative AI. I mean, why only stop at, the human or the people part of it? If I take it, someone talked about enablement as well, right? And, how do you actually, in especially large enterprise companies or even large companies, how do you start to help not only just prioritize and search, but also create the right kind of enablement content, which doesn't only take internal data, but is also able to take external data and actually, put that together for your employees. So I think both of the panelists mentioned this. There's a huge boost in terms of productivity, in terms of people experience, which you can actually see with regards to the use of generative AI. I think, again, I could come up with another 50 to 70 use cases. And that is why I say, I think, this is truly an opportunity over here for us to really reimagine what enterprises can do and will do. And I totally agree with the sentiment. I don't think we're not going to have the need for people because it's never going to be fully autonomous. But it obviously just means then that the people need to then augment their own skills and, the aspect of driving that change management, because I think this is a compelling event now where people would need to sort of augment their skills and how they use generative AI and what is the value add they provide on top of it. I think it's truly in that sense an inflection point because it's sort of putting a question which we've been discussing for 10 to 20 years really in front of most employees today in terms of how do they work with generative AI, how do they augment the work they do, and how will they reskill and actually, position what they're going to value add in the future more so, yeah?
Got it. And Utkarsh, because you also talked about productivity and Matt also talked about that, but you also talked about that. So, and you also mentioned that it will not completely replace humans, but do you think it will impact at least on if you see the current recession scenarios or any kind of layoffs that are happening right now? Do you think there is a direct impact of Gen AI tools into these things as well?
I mean, if you look at the time of it, I don't necessarily think that, any of these decisions and these decisions take, months and quarters of companies to come to these very difficult decisions. If you look at the timeliness of since the Big Bang launch of OpenAI and since when all of this has begun, I mean, I don't think necessarily the cause and effect are fully there. It's more correlation. I do think that it does, coming back to the point I made earlier, it does give the avenue for enterprises to look at what I mentioned as nonlinear growth and really what you use technology for in terms of really trying to get some of the productivity hacks going. So I don't necessarily think this has been the cause of any of the things you've seen on the technology side, but I do think that this has put, at least amongst our customers, amongst ourselves within SAP, at least I can mention, that asking ourselves, how could we use the technology better to further drive a much more uplift in our productivity, which is basically doing more with less. Yeah.
Yeah, got it, Kush. Thanks. So Betsy, if I come to you again and again talking more about the use cases again, one of the prominent use case or application that we are seeing is the code generation, right? And we see tools such as AWS Code Whisperer and Microsoft GitHub Copilot aimed at developers. What do you think of such tools? Will they like co-work with developers or can replace them in the future as well?
So the way that I see these tools being most beneficial at the moment is, again, covering the skills gap that we currently have, at least here in the United States. And so we've got a shortage of developers actually. And so to the extent that it can help our own developers do some of the simpler tasks, developing test cases perhaps, or creating playbooks for configuration, there's different tasks in which the output is actually like not copyright heavy, much more of a recipe type flavor, but it enables our developers to work a lot faster. When you're going to the actual generation of code, of course, there can be some issues with it if you're trying to have, if it's important to you that a copyright apply to the code that you're about to embed into a product, then you need to deploy that with caution, which I think has been well documented in all of the press. And so for that reason, if anything, I see a higher demand for developers and skilled people in technology. And so I don't think that there will actually be a replacement, but I do see that it will enable our developers to be, again, more productive, more innovative, and taking on the more difficult parts. The other area in which I see a problem with the code generation is, and I had a developer within our research team make this comment to me, is there's not enough high quality code that can go into the data sets that are being used to train the foundation models and the generational AI tools. And so you're still going to, while it can generate code, you're going to have to be very careful with how that is deployed and used within definitely a product set and in other settings. Because to the extent that it may have picked up on the poor quality code or code with a known cyber risk, you still have to do a lot of cleanup on the back end. And so while it may enable them to get to a proposal for code, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done with that code before it can actually be put into a productive use. So yeah, it's, again, helpful. It's augmenting them, but replacing them, I don't see that.
Got it. I recently saw a video from Stanford University where they did a kind of contest between these automated tools with the real humans. And for writing a simple code of, for example, turning off the tube light, these tools wrote up like 300-page code, and the actual developer wrote just 3-line code, right? So I think that's the real difference.
Yeah.
How
Yes, it does speed it up, but on the back end, if you're concerned at all with quality, then you have to go through the 300 pages and make sure that it's correct and it's not infringing anything, and doesn't have any vulnerabilities. So it doesn't necessarily complete the job.
Right. I think even to review that, we need a human, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Coming to you, Matt, now, because you also talked about some of the productivity set of things. As generative AI tools can support on multiple functions we talked about and save costs and increase productivity, which set of industry people will be benefited the most, like set of personas and all? Will it be tech suppliers or enterpriser or the SMB set of people?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think it plays on the former question as well. It's going to depend on the specific use cases and what the business needs are. And so if you start to think about, like we talked about, healthcare, finance, retail, large complex data sets, it's going to generate insights, automate processes, I think, enhance the decision-making capabilities. So we're doing some of that now if you look at healthcare and analyzing, say, medical images, and then maybe finance to predict market trends. But it's all the other data elements that come into this, that can feed into better decision-making and things that can learn. As I mentioned, from a retail perspective, optimizing the product recommendations. I think if you start to look at different segments like SMB, those that are in a highly competitive environment, like what can be the differentiation and how do they use these tools to focus on their core business and some of the business functions there? As I mentioned, create custom content, maybe they optimize their processes. Maybe they can take some of those manual things that have been done before that needed more human guidance and interface and operationalize those a little bit differently. So I also think the shift, if you think about tech organizations, it's going to become more inherent and part of their product portfolio. And I see that's probably where you're going to get the benefits, so there can be a broader use, for the environments in the communities that use those tech products in the portfolio. I know from a Microsoft perspective, the view is how do we embed this into our product portfolio? I would suspect it's the same for SAP and IBM as well. But that's the perspective I have on, where the benefit's going to be based on the persona is likely based on the use case and potentially the industry.
And I think I also agree with you, Matt. And just a follow-up question on that, especially on the SMB space, because I believe that SMB is a kind of like now focus areas for a lot of large tech suppliers. But at the same time, these SMBs are now utilizing these tools because they are ready to use for at least for which are for the functions which are not very core, like for example, admin functions or internal marketing and so on and so forth. Will that impact their spending on digital technologies, or will it also impact the maybe revenue funnel or revenue pipeline for these tech suppliers?
I think that it will. I think you're going to find these SMB organizations being able to compete better and level the playing field, if you will, by leveraging the technology. I think if you look at some of the tasks that maybe they wouldn't outsource or maybe they wouldn't apply technology to, they can now. We talked a little bit about HR. We've talked about, say, advertising. I think it'll allow them to take the administrative burden out of that and allow for more innovation to happen, the time for innovation and creativity that they need to do to differentiate themselves.
Got it. Thanks, Matt. Betsy, coming to you again, like because the background is your background into AI ethics and all. Currently, there are a lot of generative AI tools facing challenges such as data hallucination or IP infringement, etc. Do you think AI governance or ethics and content safety will be mandatory for the adoption of such models in long term?
That's a very interesting question because it depends on what you mean by mandatory. I think in terms of a business and enterprise doing everything that they can to present themselves as a trustworthy partner, vendor, supplier, what have you, then they need to, as a matter of corporate policy, adopt such measures so that you're implementing AI governance, initiating reviews that are appropriate to their organization, doing a risk analysis. If you mean by mandatory what the regulators will do, certainly if we are not going to be, we as all of the business enterprises are not going to be responsible in how we adopt and deploy these tools, then certainly the regulators are going to step in, which we've already seen in certain regions, especially over in EU. And, the press of ChatGPT and other generative AI models that have had unexpected outcomes or outcomes that have caught the attention of media, that's certainly catching the attention of the regulators as well. In other cases, regulations that already apply to certain industry are also impacting their ability to adopt these tools. So the financial industry is certainly one of the best examples of that, in which the regulations that already apply to their operations are impacting their ability to adopt something like a generative AI tool. So to that extent, it will be mandatory. And so I hate to say the word mandatory because I do believe that regulations should be focused more on the risk of the particular use case. It's not a situation in which one size fits all. So you can certainly over-regulate it, which would have the detrimental effect of stifling innovation. But I do think that we can come up with reasonable regulation, again, addressing the risk case, and then encouraging all enterprises to adopt it in a responsible manner and taking these risks into consideration from day one, looking at risks from the data that has been used to train the models, looking at it when the models are trained, looking at it as the models are deployed. So it's really across the entire life cycle. You just like there's not one size fits all for each use case, there's also not one point in time where you can say, okay, we're good. So it is a continuous operation.
Right. And I think you also mentioned about the European region now, I think launching some kind of compliance policies around these tools. We saw China is also doing something similar. Even India is now launching DPDP bill, which is data protection, which is very much related to these GenAI tools as well. But do you also think that organizations like large enterprises would also do the same, will formulate these kind of compliance policies for their employees? Because what we have seen right now, we have seen two kind of scenarios. One, where companies are positive and optimistic about utilizing these tools to enhance the productivity or efficiency. But at the same time, a few companies are banning its uses as well, right? So what is your take on that as well?
So if you look at the companies that are banning it, again, some of those have been in banks in which they're highly regulated. Other instances are until there is appropriate guidance around using the tool. So you saw some instances in which companies' trade secrets were released into ChatGPT because employees were creating a presentation that was not meant to go public. I would guess that if the Twitter source code was actually released as the press announced that it was, then it has wandered into these tools. And so until there's a few more guardrails and tools that can actually help us protect us, I expect that corporations are going to be cautious in how they adopt them. And it's better to come out with, don't use these yet, until there's a more enterprise-ready formulation of a specific tool. So the more specific the data set is, the safer the use of the tool. We've seen this. Stanford released a data set that is focused on biomedical information, articles and textbooks of things of that nature. And when you use the generative AI in that setting, trained on that data set, it's much easier for a hospital or research entity to adopt that, because when you ask a query and it's a nonsensical query, is, write me an essay on how Charles Dickens has influenced English culture, the AI tool is likely to come back and say, I don't understand the question, or I can tell you about Charles Dickens who wrote a paper about cancer, but I can't tell you about how Charles Dickens influenced English culture. And so once you start adopting generative AI that is more confined in its use case like that, then you can see these corporations say, we don't want these general purpose ones because they can come up with some very unexpected, sometimes offensive output. Wait until we have one that is tuned specifically for your need.
Got it. So Utkarsh, if I ask you the same thing, we have seen a lot of traction in the B2C space when specific talking about ChatGPT. But still there are a lot of dilemmas in the B2B space to utilize these tools for any functions of the use case. How do you see this in the long term?
Yeah, no, great point, right? Because I think this is now we're getting to the crux of the issue, because, there are ethical, I would say, compliance and probably even intellectual property considerations which need to kind of come into bear over here, right? And from an enterprise perspective, we serve enterprises as well who are our customers. So many of the times we have to also kind of be very careful in considering what are some of the regulations, both in terms of geography or industry they may be operating in. And hence, even when we look at our own products, we have to kind of be very mindful in terms of how we could even augment generative AI, keeping some of those things into account, right? And the idea here is, I think there were some good examples shared by Betsy. There's a risk of this IP contamination as well, which we have to be very careful around in terms of how we use generative AI and not necessarily allow that. So even, for example, when we are partnering with Gen AI companies, one of the guardrails of how we partner is also around how do we make sure that not only are we sticking to ethical and compliance considerations, but also intellectual property considerations. Because at some point, when you start augmenting your own code using generative AI, you don't know where to draw the line. So I think there's a lot of thinking and guardrails which needs to go in. I think there are already many discussions which are ongoing between companies who actually generate these AI tools, have these AI models, as well as companies such as ours, and I'm sure the other panelists as well, in terms of how we can actually put this in the context of an enterprise use case setting for our enterprise customers, but also for our own use as an enterprise. because I think that becomes super critical before we can sort of kind of take it out on full scale and say that, yep, this is how we're gonna go about it. And I think the most critical thing over here, which we have to just recall, is that I think we've just had 6 months or so of this, and we are already kind of exploding with the excitement and the use cases. I think as we look at leveraging more the enterprise data and companies which have access to the enterprise data, and then start to use the technology for this in a guardrail way, you will start to see a much more structured, but still an explosion of enterprise-ready use cases coming. So I'm still very positive. I still agree, though, with the panelists that there is some work ahead for us to go about before we can kind of see, really that explosion of enterprise use cases, which obviously we're all touching on right now, but it's not, I would say, full potential as yet. Yeah.
Got it. And just a follow-up question on that as well. And we have one question from our attendees as well on the similar lines about the modeling. Because generative AI requires massive amount of data to assure reliable model, right? Is this practical for most applications or use cases specific to different industries, or it will have different norms for different industries?
I mean, I think Matt mentioned this, and so did Betsy, right? Like, obviously, depending on the industries, there are regulations and there are sort of restrictions which already exist pre-generative AI. And if anything, it sort of complicates or at least nuances, if that's a better word, on how we will probably need to use AI given some of those restrictions and regulations which are in place. So definitely this will vary by industry. Definitely we need to be more careful in certain industries and certain geographies than others, because that is the requirement. So for example, I would be careful about using both external people data, which is available out there in different platforms, and internal together, because that might not necessarily obey GDPR rules as per se unless it's guardrailed properly, right? I'm using the EU example. So I think, definitely, different industries and different geographies will have very different guardrails, which we need to navigate very carefully as we go along this, yeah?
Got it. Thanks, Utkarsh. So coming to the last section of the session, and to you, Matt, although we see a lot of enthusiasm around the adoption of these tools, enterprises are still struggling to figure out how to integrate them into their business workflows for deriving optimum value for them, right? So what should be the ideal playbook for enterprises to adopt generative AI technologies or associated tools in such scenarios?
Well, it's a broad question, but I think there's a couple things. I think as you start to look at the data and the quality of the data that you have, you want to make them as efficient as you possibly can. So you need to look at model optimization. Like, what are the number of parameters that you really want to bring in, and can you optimize the architecture? Ideally, smaller models can be trained faster, require less of a ability to just continue to consume and churn, and they're easier to deploy. So probably start out small, and then think about like data efficiency, like what quality data do you want to use, and can you start to base it on other data and models that have already been trained? Like, can you start to do reuse, and can you like take a pre-trained model and fine tune it for a specific task? Like, it's really start to think about think small and think efficient and allow to expand from there would be my point of view on that.
And will there be a similar story for all kind of personas, or it would be differed by enterprises or the SMB space?
It's a good question. I think a starting point is to start small and think about how do you optimize and have the right data set. I think if you look at some large complex data sets, it might be a little bit more complex about how you start with that. If you think about manufacturing, you think about things like autonomous vehicles and the amount of data that's generated there, you're probably going to think about that a little bit differently about how you process that. You're probably not going to start out as small, but you might start out with a better value proposition first as you go to derive those conclusions about what you want to derive from that.
Got it. Betsy, if I ask the same question to you also, what would be the ideal playbook for enterprises to adopt Gen AI technology, but considering the ethical dilemmas arising regarding this technology?
Yeah, so Matt hit on a lot of the good points, but part of what I would do is before adopting, having a review process with that considers the impact to all the potential stakeholders. So it's not just about the people operating the system, inputting, and then the output that they're using it for, but also is there anybody else, any other stakeholder? So for instance, if you're a bank, then the bank's customer who could be impacted by the output, and taking a very thoughtful review of what that looks like. Very important that you understand, to the extent you can with these models, the type of data that was used to train them and how they generate the output. So it's very difficult with the generative AI to get to the level of transparency and explainability that we would all like to see, just as the nature and state of the technology. But certainly doing your best to find out that type of information before deploying it. That will in turn help you understand what potential flaws are with the system. No AI system is perfect at the moment. True of any software program. We've always lived with the fact that software has known defects. No AI system is perfect, but it's very important that you understand the flaws and how you will address them. And so where do you need to inject human in the loop? What are you going to do if accuracy levels drop to a certain point? How often are you checking for drift? And so really understanding the qualities, but also the drawbacks of the AI, and then coming up with a plan to address them. And then I would also encourage companies to have, similar to you have a disaster recovery plan. If there is an incident in which there is a truly unintended, unexpected output or incident from the use of the AI system, then what is your plan of attack should that happen? So that you can't always predict how AI will go wrong. John Oliver released a video talking about the pros and cons of AI, and he said, the problem is that AI is stupid in ways that we can't predict. So knowing that you can't predict all of the potential outcomes, what kind of disaster recovery, it won't be a disaster hopefully, but what kind of recovery plan do you have to address that should that happen?
Got it. And I was also listening one podcast, Bitsy, and the host of the podcast was talking about when should we start listening to AI, and when we should stop also. So I think that is also one of the key area how to do it. And also one more thing, let's see if I ask you, like again, from an ethical dilemmas point of view, there are a lot of APIs now available in the market to integrate with these tools, right? And we have now coming a lot of marketplaces as well. Even OpenAI has now its own marketplace for different APIs to integrating tools and all. What do you think about this? Like, is there any toolkit or any kind of playbook for enterprises to understand which APIs to go with, or is there any framework where we can understand which are good to have, or which are let's ignore them? Is there any kind of playbook to do this kind of analysis?
There's a lot of good tools out there in terms of evaluating the quality. And so, and then the other tools that I would encourage teams to use is looking at, there's tools that can actually help you evaluate things such as fairness and search for bias, and evaluate the accuracy of the tool. So yes, I mean, like IBM Research is continually putting out new tools. You can go to their website and look for a variety of tools, most of which have been contributed to open source communities. I know Microsoft has a number of tools as well that help evaluate both the AI itself and then the APIs as well. And then again, thinking the use case from end to end, and not just this will save us as we try to save money and become more productive, but what's it going to do to the person on the other side? What is the actual end game once the system is put into place, and evaluating the entire system you're creating with the API in that context.
Got it. Thanks, Betsy. And coming to you, Utkarsh, with the same question again, because if I see SAP, it's one of the biggest enterprise application software company. What would be the ideal playbook for enterprises to adopt Gen AI technology, considering large workloads like ERP or CRM in a particular view?
Yeah, no, I'll try and speak a bit more from a lens of what we are doing as well, and then we can also share a little bit of what we see some of our customers do in the context of what you just said. Centrally, I would say there are a few things from a playbook. And remember, the playbook word is interesting because it sort of means that somebody has cracked it and they know the playbook. The playbook is also dynamic. It's evolving as we go along. But the way we see it is around three different buckets, right? We're seeing more around the aspects of how do you control and sort of put some guardrails, which is around ethical, compliance, and IP, which is a central body which sort of helps oversee that. But then you also have a central body which is helping drive communication, enablement, and also that democratization of how some of these tools could be used, because that's more around making sure there's still a concept of innovation within the field, within parts of our organization, which actually are embracing things which could augment their day-to-day job. And then on the third side, we also have much more in an intentional way, looking at both building and partnering with AI solutions for our products, for our solutions. And that could apply for any enterprise as well, in terms of how we could actually embed generative AI, either through our own AI solutions or through partnering with other solutions, or whether that is what we call OEM, whether that is some kind of a partnership which we go to market together and have an API, So you kind of have these three dimensions in terms of how you want to try and make sure that while at one time you're encouraging democratizing AI, a second time you're much more intentional about how you're embedding and partnering on AI within your products, but at the same time looking at more the controls and the compliance around ethics, legal, as well as IP-related stuff, which sort of puts the right boundaries. So it's sort of anything new which comes on, it's sort of a similar playbook. And the concept of, I love the concept of the bias in hiring. I mean, these concepts existed on HR solutions, which we have even before. And the idea with AI is that you just got to have a much smarter HR solution now, which is able to detect not just bias, which is coming from humans, which of course was a big part of it, but also bias, which may or may not be coming from AI tools, which might be sitting on the end even of the customer using some of these HR solutions. So I think we sort of have an opportunity over here to really look at enterprise applications in a very different way with the augmentation of generative AI here. So.
Got it, Kush. And one more thing that I wanted to ask everyone before I hand it over to Saloni back, in terms of future of generative AI tools, or in terms of understanding where we are heading as a human, right? As a human race, where we are heading, it is like communicating more or detaching to other human beings. It is about utilizing technologies more and more for productivity enhancement, or utilizing it for betterment of human lives. How do you see generative AI handling these kind of broader themes in the aspect of we as a human? Any thoughts from any one of you?
I think it's an interesting perspective. I mean, if you think about the authentic connection, human to human, in that connection, and if those connections then become machine to human, which feels like a human on the other side, and that is actually a machine and generated, I think that's an open question as to how that will evolve. I think there will always be that shift, though, for that, emotional connection to human interaction. So I think it'll probably train us in our abilities to how do we apply the skills differently to be more creative about how we engage. I think the future will tell us. It's hard to tell at this point. As these tools and these systems and the data evolves and the learning evolves, I think it'll evolve over time.
Any thoughts from you, Betsy?
Yeah, I agree with Matt that it's kind of too early to tell. One of the aspects of having transparency and explainability within the AI system that I appreciate and advocate for is that those theories encourage you to make sure that the person knows that they are engaging with an AI system and not with a human. And so I continue to think that's very important, that it's always very clear that you aren't talking to a person, you're talking to a machine. But it is very exciting as to where these models can help us make advancements. We're seeing some very exciting advancements in medical fields, coming up with critical treatment plans, reaching third world countries. So making great progress on the medical field that I think can have a huge impact. I think there can be a huge impact on the food supply chain, and then also on climate change, where all of these data sets, where we have massive amounts of data that can help solve these problems. And I do think that these will help us reach the answers sooner than we would if we weren't using these tools.
Got it. Any thoughts from you, Utkarsh?
The beautiful thing about going third is I think we've covered all the good points already. No, I think, I think the two speakers have covered it well. Honestly, I think we obviously have tremendous opportunity beyond just making enterprise autonomous. And I see, you go on LinkedIn, you go on any news article, you see tons of lovely use cases which have actually benefited parts of the world. And of course, there are some scary ones as well which come along, right? There's a lot of power in terms of what we can generate over here. And I think with some amount of careful and cautious maneuvering, we can actually minimize some of these risks which we have to go on with.
Right. I also agree that. And once again, thank you so much to all the leaders for your time and all the learnings. I believe we all agree at least that we have started the journey towards autonomy for betterment of organizations or humans as a whole. Although there is a lot to do and achieve, but at least businesses have started experimenting with Gen AI tools. Thank you so much for your time again. Over to you, Saloni.